The Secret Sanskrit by guest author October 23, 2022. Guest article by Berk. Gümüs.
If the mass of mankind would discover the secret sciences which originate from the ancient secret Sanskrit and from the approximately 800,000 banished scrolls of the Library of Alexandria, see Contact Report 498, then man would progress in his consciousness development to such an extent that he would become practically a demigod, respectively a true sage, and thus would become free of all his problems, and mankind would have conquered space and settled other planets already approximately 200 years ago. Religions, politics, and the financial economy would disappear in shortest time. Wars, discord, hunger, and all evils of the world would have a sudden end, because in a peaceful world no rulers and capital makers could do any more, beginning and advance for the attainment of power and financial profiteering. Where suddenly no more wars and no more discord are, there also no more war materials would be needed, and where no more hunger or no other evil is, there also no unscrupulous profiteers could launch their finances further. If there were no more religions, because man would finally recognize himself as God, then there would be no more need for popes, clergymen, bigwigs, rabbis, gurus, and bishops, and so on, who could mislead the people and demand their possessions. All this is prevented, however, by not making the secret science as accessible to normal people, because they would suddenly bring deep knowledge and the end of all power and profiteers, of which religions and politics are the greatest. That is why man is scourged in ignorance, and the knowledge due to him is kept away. Excerpt from Adventures of a Globetrotter by Billy Edward Albert Meyer, page 133 to 137. Unofficial translation. Secret Sanskrit, 2 words which are meaningless for millions of people, because it represents for them unknown and completely simply empty threshed straw. So, for millions, words without concept when they happen to hear them. Secret Sanskrit, 2 words of astronomical importance for those to whom the mystery hidden behind the words is no longer a real mystery, because they know that behind the simple words is hidden life, real life, and the unraveling of the mystery of nature as it is seen in its entirety from Secret Sanskrit, which originally arose from the teaching of the Spirit. However, what is written in the normal public Sanskrit does not necessarily mean that everything that is explained and explained in it corresponds to the true reality and truth. Much has no connection with the secret Sanskrit and is to be seen namely purely mythological and to be understood only in this sense. Secret Sanskrit included, in addition to the simple, normal, public Sanskrit, knowledge, power, life, health, lore, technology, wisdom, creation, and history. Secret Sanskrit, ancient and powerful knowledge, significant to initiate the omnipotence of life. Public Sanskrit, however, is unfortunately misinterpreted and even mistranslated by very many, as well as often completely misrepresented and misunderstood. Especially different translations around the turn of the century should be pointed out, because many things have been interpreted as fairy tales and fables, what in reality were the deeds of a highly developed human consciousness. Unthinkably old is this oldest written language of mankind. For thousands of years it was the written language of the people, before it disappeared quite suddenly from the general knowledge of the common people about 600 years before Christ. With it also the secret Sanskrit disappeared, which was held only by a handful of selected and consciously high knowledgeable as valuable knowledge in collections and often only in the consciousness until today. Much was handed down only orally to those who were worth a great knowledge and consciously possessed the ability to do so, because secret criterion means power over life and death. Power which borders on the real creative truth, which means power over man himself and over matter. power that makes the knower the great sage if he can grasp the knowledge, train it, and use it correctly. The human being as a high sage, he subordinates himself to the laws of creation. He no longer classifies himself to a god, whom the religion-believing man of the earth sees erroneously as creator of living life and who believes to be only a few small steps away from this imaginary god, whom he calls the primordial one, because he, the man, is supposed to be God's image and to embody him on the world as power and creator, however always conscious of himself that he is, despite his power, a child, a selfless tool, and a being of the highest, who is able to solve the riddle of the primordial, and the primordial itself, and only on the basis of it God. But by turning to such a God, man has turned away from the truly highest, from the creation, which is the true origin of all life and all things. Secret Sanskrit, written thousands of years ago, in tree bark, stone tablets, metal foils, pressed cattle fibers and palm leaves and so on, hands down the becoming and passing away of all matter, and it hands down the evolution of all life and consciousness, as it also carries a chronicle. It testifies to the restlessly rolling wheel of the time which touches on, always returning because of its starting point to bring a new turn, a new life, restless and restless through space and time, the wheel of the eternity. Unfortunately, in the course of the rolled-away millennia, the largest part of the old writings was lost, so that only the least knowledge of the normal public Sanskrit was handed down, a small fraction of the whole, in which also connections with extraterrestrial humans and their teachings on flying machines were mentioned, and that much more clearly than everything in the today known public Sanskrit is the case. Professor Giuseppe Tucci, Italy, found in 1948 in the monastery hangar in Tibet the last records of the today normal, that is to say simple and public Sanskrit. These were written on bovine fibers, and today, after having been copied in Italy, they are again in the possession of the monastery as an ancient and valuable collector's item. Besides, it is worth mentioning that the finder of the valuable piece was a certain Tenzing Norgay, who is identical with Sherpa Tenzing Norgay, the alleged first Everest conqueror, who was at that time, together with Professor Tucci, the first chief of the Tucci Sanskrit Tibet expedition. Originally, the manuscript is said to have been written in Turkestan, the place from where Buddhism spread at that time about 2,000 years BC. From there it is said to have been brought to Tibet later. This was the assumption of Tucci, who, as often before, was right. Since the secret Sanskrit now holds an almost uncanny knowledge in itself, from which the human being can develop consciously to such an extent that he would practically become a demigod or a true sage and thus be free of all problems, then already in ancient times the majority of the secret science knowledge was simply pulled out of the course by the governments and high scientists, as well as by priests and secret knowledge bearers, whereby also very much was lost, namely of all things extremely important records. So, the whole thing was declared as a secret science and withheld from the people. Very unfortunate for the layman and for the non-knowing, because by this it is completely unknown to tens of millions of people that the word secret, Sanskrit in particular and in general, and a considerable part of the whole knowledge still exist at all. A quite infamous meanness of the big shots opposite, the people opposite their slaves, if one considered it right and wants to remain with the real truth. But on the other hand, there is again a certain right on the side of these all suppressed big shot, because not everybody is able to absorb the teachings of the Sanskrit without letting break through egoistic successes like material power, personal lusts and cravings. The human being in general today has unfortunately sunk so low that in his greedy and murderous actions he is below the animal which, by the way, is regarded by the majority of mankind only as a means to an end, as a bastard, a beast, and even as a useless object which is simply beaten to death and stomped on when man encounters it or when he simply feels like it. Unfortunately, this is so. But as a human being, as a real human being and creature of the creation, he is obliged to change this, but first the truth and reality must be recognized by him. Fortunately, however, there are people on this earth who have gained a certain knowledge and help others in their task of further development. So, for centuries and millennia, the secret scientific knowing ones and the big shots have prevented every possibility to make more beneficial to the individual human being than seems to be beneficial to him. And those who are granted to learn a certain measure of secret Sanskrit and to assimilate the knowledge are bound to the strictest secrecy. Any record of their teachings, which are transmitted to them only orally, is forbidden to them, because never a record or any other secret knowledge of the secret Sanskrit should reach the general public, because firstly, which is to be assumed as probable, a panic would arise which could take on immeasurable proportions, and secondly, especially such subjects would plunge into a zealous study, who are to be kept away from the secret Sanskrit by the silence of its existence, because what could happen if just such pronounced subjects would absorb the teachings of the secret Sanskrit? That is easy to see. A tremendous and immeasurable catastrophe could befall the whole world, even the solar system, because just those subjects would try to satisfy their material cravings and their personal lusts by using and exploiting their power of consciousness. In a short time, there would be only conquerors unsubjugated, or in other words, masters unslaved. However, since the greed for power and cunning would be unstoppable and they would try to exterminate each other by their mental powers and the one help of their slaves, it could only mean a world war, which would atomize the earth, because inevitably the greatest powers of the human consciousness would be released and put to use. The greed for power of the individual would automatically have the consequence that every thought or every assumption of a danger would die off, would become silent and would be suppressed. Kings to know the secret spiritual teaching creation energy teaching order in Myanmar.
654th contact Thursday, 16th June 2016, 9:51 a.m.
The spiritual teaching has brought two old Lyrian, distant descendants from the immigration power that came to Earth 13,500 years ago as emigrants, 2891 Earth years ago to the eastern part of Earth, respectively, to a large group of Earth humans who lived in a mountainous region of the country today called Burma, respectively Myanmar, nobility formerly Burma/Burma/Myanmar. This group, which comprised 309 female and male Earth humans, formed a small order with an educational institution, which secretly lasted until the beginning of the 20th century. This group was able to survive into the modern age through constant descendants, but various members migrated from the community, mainly to the areas of northern India at that time. From 1814, however, the group began to slowly die out as a result of increasing deaths, and by 1850 the group had grown to 32 people of different ages. Though it has to be said repeatedly that nearly 2,900 years ago a small secret order with a small educational institution was founded in the former area of today's Burma, where the spiritual doctrine was taught, whereby this order existed until 1917, nearly 2,900 years. From 1856 my father's father maintained contact with the senior leader of the order for about 50 years. Whom he often visited and whom he also taught in Satipatthana meditation. The small order at that time still comprised 4 persons, of whom the leader of the order died in 1907, followed by the remaining 3 persons of the order, who were also very old, and thus the secret order came to an end. The then instructed earthlings of the mentioned group, which initially comprised 309 persons, spread the teachings brought to them among their peers on the one hand, but on the other hand also by some leaving their homeland and going the way to the then Nepal respectively North India, where they also spread the learned, but with only little success. Nevertheless, the spiritual doctrine has also spread there partly among a group of interested people and has been preserved for about 530 years, whereby the followers of the doctrine called themselves Bade for the sake of the doctrine and the change to the enlightened and awakened human being, which means enlightened and awakened. The teaching was received and then also learned by Siddhartha Gautama, that is to say Siddhartha Gautama, but was not understood by him and transformed at his own discretion into a completely strange and unrealistic, false teaching, whereby he integrated various good values of the spiritual teaching into his fantasy teaching. So it is to be understood that the values of the spiritual doctrine, which are partly listed in the Buddhism religion, do not refer to the well-known Buddhism, which was founded about 6 centuries before Emmanuel by Siddhartha Gautama and spread worldwide as a teaching tradition and religion. This teaching tradition and religion, however, are not much better than any other religion with its heresies and fantasies, because they are far from any reality and truth.
Guest article by Berk, Gümüs.